All right, welcome to Newb Perspectives, Episode 3. I am Tyler. I'll be your host for today. And today we're going to be talking about exploration and a role play. Our first question that I would like to ask our fellow noobs is, what is exploration in a role-playing game? Let's start with Torrey.
I think for me personally, it can be kind of a lot of different things. I think the classic image that most people kind of have come up is, long journeys between cities or going over vast expanses of barren land or jungle or whatnot. Mm-hmm. But I think it can also branch out a lot more than that. I think that's kind of the common, but I think you can also even have exploration within cities or even within single buildings, just kind of checking out what is there, what's available, kind of what's the story behind this place and what happened.
For me, I've always thought of exploration as outside of a cityscape, so kind of in nature, you're going through the woods, you probably hunt, you're navigating to find your destination, and that's kind of how I always see it in RPGs.
Getting food and stuff and having to survive off the land, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's that. When I think of exploration, the word exploration itself, outside of the context of RPGs, the only thing I can think of is Indiana Jones.
Right, yeah, you're basically in in an environment that is hostile to you, not necessarily due to combat or a person or a creature trying to kill you, but the literal environment, the trees want you dead.
I mean, a person might have put you in a pit of snakes.
Well, that's true. There could have been a person that caused you to be in that scary environment. But I like what you mentioned, Torrey, that you can explore more than just vast expanses of space. And it definitely opens up more ideas as a GM, for what could and couldn't count as exploration, right? And it seems like we're sort of talking about exploration as anything that isn't combat or social, right? Anything that leads to one of those things.
Yeah, kind of a shocking term, but to explore things.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness.
to go out and explore that house or that weird basement that weird noises are coming out of, or that dungeon or the forest,
or the new city or anything. Yeah,
it's just going out and exploring kind of what the world holds necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, often though it's not even a deliberate exploration, it's kind of a means to an end. You kind of have a goal and you think, okay, so we need to get to this location to do this thing, so we're going to go through the woods, and that's kind of an exploration time. But it's not really your goal, it's how to get to your goal.
Right, or exploring a city because you need to find the informant that you have in that city, or you need to find the person who you're looking for, or something like that.
Some suspect to a murder or something.
Yeah, totally. So it does seem like a means to an end. With that being said, the journey is more important than the destination, as they say. So how can we make the journey fun? How can we make the exploration fun?
Like I said, when I think of Indiana Jones, what makes the journey fun is that there's danger and there's obstacles in your way. Because if you wanted to travel a long distance and every day you wake up and you're just rowing a boat for 8 hours, that's not
right.
Not the funnest.
I guess if we want to talk about what's fun, we should probably talk about what our experiences have been, right? With exploration, and maybe we can draw on some of that. So, has anyone had any games that they've experienced exploration in? I sure hope so.
Pretty much every single one of them. Hard to find one that doesn't. I rarely can just teleport everywhere I want to go in an instant.
Only in some games.
That being said, though, it's so often kind of glossed over, especially in Pathfinder systems or the Dungeons and Dragons system. You kind of take what could be an exploration moment and you just kind of get through it quickly with a simple roll or just quick role play of you're walking across the streets and finally you get to the location rather than trying to play out a situation.
Right. So your experience has been a lot of what could have been exploration turned into a skill check, and then a quick bit of narration, and then you're at the destination.
Yeah, I think it's harder for me because I've been playing in more campaigns where exploration maybe isn't the highlight, and so while it is a fun part, it's kind of, again, as I mentioned before, like a means to an end. I want to get to whatever's next, and so I don't want to kind of dilly-dally on that detail.
Right, and that's totally fair for a lot of people, right? They like the, as much as the saying goes, it's about the journey. Some people do really enjoy lots of destinations.
Yeah, don't give me any of that. It's about the journey crap.
It's not about the journey. It's about the friends you make along the way.
Yeah. And the money you get.
Right, like if you could skip that plane ride to get to wherever you're going, I imagine that a lot of people would.
Yeah, and you know that if something's not being skipped, there's gonna be an encounter of some kind.
Right, yeah.
I really enjoy trying to take your sheep through those dense woods, random farmer lady, but I really am doing it for the 10 gold you're going to give me at the end of this. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, actually, fetch quests are a great option for exploration. So, I guess, yeah, so Sarah, your experience has been a lot of, like, skipping the exploration. Anyone else had any experience with what their exploration was like in games they've played or GM before?
Yeah, I think for me, I've definitely had a lot of instances kind of similar to, Sarah, what you were mentioning, and just kind of, it can be a lot simpler, especially like if you're in the middle of a plot. It's like, even as a DM, like if you're in the middle of something, breaking up your whole plot to make like this in-depth walking through the forest rather than just, roll nature or something to see how well you can actually trek your way through it or something along those lines is a simple means of just making sure it's dealt with but getting back to the main point. I feel like that is a very common aspect, but I feel like there are some times, especially when making like dungeons or anything like that you can, even without necessarily needing to make like combat or anything, the exploration of kind of trying to navigate it and see where the things are and what the routes are and what takes you where and everything, I think that can also do really well as like a form of exploration that like a lot of different things can do and a lot of different systems can hold well.
Right, and I think what you're talking about doesn't even necessarily require like players rolling dice.
No.
It's interacting with the environment in like a more role playing way, right? Not necessarily socially interacting role playing wise, but like interacting with the physical environment around you.
Exactly.
Right? I can think of a time when I ran a puzzle dungeon, which, for those people who don't know what a puzzle dungeon is, it's a dungeon full of puzzles. Instead of instead of like combat encounters and social encounters, you just have like a bunch of like different puzzles or different traps or different basically situations that the players have to overcome in order to get to the end.
Yeah, and not necessarily traps in the way that like, oh, if you get this wrong, you fall into a pit of spikes.
Right,
but
right.
like
Or snakes.
Yeah, but like or snakes. But like traps is kind of more along the lines of just like, like you're locked in a room and like you have to figure out how to kind of get out of that, like with the environment and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely interacting with the environment is a key aspect of exploration.
Yeah, the more we talk about this, the more I just have the mental image of Indiana Jones as just an RPG character.
Yeah, he would.
Very easy to do.
Yeah, dungeon exploration, getting the good shit.
Fair.
Yeah, I feel like I've definitely watched more than one YouTube video about what Indiana Jones would look like as like a D&D campaign.
That's got to be a very popular thing. I haven't seen any of it.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of skill checks, right? Like running away from a boulder, getting away from those sleeper darts and stuff.
When you said that, I thought you meant like creating Indiana Jones the character.
No.
I also thought that, yeah.
And be like, well, you just give him a whip.
Get a lot of attitude.
Give him a whip, give him a hat.
Give him
and he has a gun, yeah.
He has a gun.
Yeah.
Going back to the point that was mentioned about like more like small scale exploration, about like interacting with your environment. It's also another good way in that instance to kind of express your character, because I've played a very mischievous little fairy character, and so they have a different way of kind of looking at their environment. And so put into an office situation, you guys were all in the campaign, you know it, listeners, you don't, I'll explain. They're very mischievous, and they do whatever they want for fun. And so when they come to this kind of religious altarpiece, or it was just a shrine, there was a lot of gold. And so a decision can be made there. Do you take the gold, do you pocket it, or, like my character, do you rearrange all of the gold figurines and leave them for someone to find later? You know, I mean, you still pocket one piece of gold,
Take-
obviously, but
just take all the gold and just beg for the DM to smite you.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, interacting with the environment in that way is definitely a key aspect of exploration.
yeah, like how would my character see it? What are they looking for?
Yeah.
You know, what's
Yeah.
their drive in this situation?
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of things that we have done with exploration. We've talked about like a wide range, including basically just a roll and then a thing, and then you get to the place, or having to fully immerse yourself in the sort of environment, within the four walls of whatever building you're in, or like streetscape, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
How have you found your GMs to make it fun, or as a GM, how have you made it fun for yourself and your players, in terms of all of that? Like, what end of the spectrum do you prefer to fall on? Stuff like that.
It's a really good question. I feel like sometimes as a player, I forget the exploration, and I kind of miss the details that as a DM or GM that you put extra care into. But now that I'm starting to world build for my own campaign, I realize how fun it is to like build certain locations and encounters and situations and just like natural things that if players look into, they'd find all these fun little details. And the players, they don't really go for those details all the time.
The key word there is if.
Yeah. But it's so much fun to build like a juicy little story in, or like a very fun piece of like natural lore.
Yeah. Yeah, I do feel like players tend to be more interested in the plot, interested in sort of like what their characters are doing in the moment, rather than necessarily all the lore pieces that fill it. That being said, though, I do think the lore is important, because if it's not there, you're basically just like
Droning through a flat
Yeah.
landscape of nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't feel real, and I feel like part of the fun of RPGs is that it feels like you're inhabiting a real world and interacting with it in a real way.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. And like I feel it's like players aren't always necessarily going to like come immediately to it, but I think it's also like to a degree a big thing on like the GM to kind of gauge where your players are at.
Yeah.
Because like there are definitely some players who want to like, if they see something, like go check it out and investigate and like want to like kind of build into that. So putting, you know, like a shrine to something on the side of the road, or like an old ruin, or like something, you know, off the beaten path that they might then want to kind of look into and do have more like exploration time with it, rather than just fast traveling down the road,
Right.
can work really well with those players. But at the same time, if you have players who are more like goal driven and just kind of really have that one thing that they want to do, like they want to get that orc, or they want to, you know, go save that, like whatever it is, and that's like their main goal, trying to put more things on the exploration side for them to kind of run into isn't necessarily going to suit them well, and if anything may not just end up annoying them, because it's constantly just kind of getting in the way of them doing what they're trying to do. So like a lot of it just comes down to like how well you as a GM kind of just know your party and kind of know what they're interested in and what they're looking for.
Right. Yeah. No, totally. Like, if you have a group full of people who, I think putting the stuff in, even if you have a group full of people who might not interact with it, putting it in there, putting a little bit of thought towards it as a GM can be really helpful. Just as like a way of sort of like breaking up the monotony of here's a roll, you get to your place, do a thing. Here's a roll, get to the place, do a
100%.
thing, you know? Even if they don't interact with it, I think as a GM you kind of have to be okay with your players not interacting with everything you put in the world, because they're not. They're 100%, like they literally can't.
Yeah.
If you, like, unless you have like those artificial walls up, like in video games, you know, like you can't go past this X direction or this Y direction, right? Like,
and I'd almost take it a step further to say it's not even just like be aware of it happening, but like expect it to happen. Like it's going
100%.
to occur.
Yeah.
Like it's like, especially like at least in like some of the campaigns like I've run, like, you know, I tend to like to kind of like, as you say, like make sure everything has like a bit of a prep for it. Obviously I can't prep everything in every situation because players could literally do anything. So you can't make sure that every situation in existence is covered, but like putting like a rough bit of effort into that so that at least if they go there you have something to run with is always a good plan. But it's true, like you know, in any kind of given point there's, you know, sometimes up to like half to 3/4 of the content players just don't run into because it's just something they weren't interested in or they're focused on something else right now, and that's kind of just what life is as a DM. Like, you're gonna have stuff consistently that just isn't going to get interacted with, and that doesn't necessarily just mean that just because they don't now doesn't mean they're never going to. Like,
like they might come back.
Exactly, like they might come back later and be like, oh, that's a cool plot line, but I'm busy right now, but I'm going to come back to that.
Yeah, you can't do every side quest right away.
Yeah.
I think that something that I found really fun and really interesting is figuring out what I think my players are going to interact with. So as a GM of a Pathfinder campaign that's running right now, I set up a sort of like underground city with a whole bunch of tunnel systems. These tunnel systems were described to have terrifying creatures at the ends of them, perhaps. Like the creatures weren't necessarily fully described, but they were alluded to because they created these massive tunnel networks. And, you know,
usually a pretty good warning sign.
and so sometimes your players ignore those warning signs and go down the tunnels anyways.
Even
goopy walls, that's not dangerous.
The walls were they were definitely goopy, slimy walls. It was definitely indicated that there might be some sort of worm or giant insect at the end. But you know, sometimes the players they want to explore those places, and sometimes they'll look at that and be like, that's a cool thing that I'm not gonna touch, and then go on their way.
And sometimes they run into those places, go into the dangerous places, get very heavily punished and almost total party killed by those places, and then for some reason, despite your valiant efforts, want to continue deeper, even though they were almost just fully murdered by the one instance they ran into.
It's because, Torrey, just like Indiana Jones, every adventure wants the thrill and glory and, you know, cash money that they could get from
Indiana Jones went to places because he knew there was something there to take out.
Yeah, he didn't go... the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull wasn't just the kingdom down the road. It was,
to someone down the road it was!
But there's a crystal skull there.
Yeah, he's like, you know what? We should go into the Temple of Doom because there's something to steal, not because we saw a centipede and there might be more, but we don't know what it sleeps on or whatever.
I'm sorry, I interpret his thrill to adventure differently than you guys.
That's very fair.
That being said, I feel like we have to acknowledge to a certain degree the bias most of these opinions have, because I feel like, at least myself personally, my most experience with RPG systems has been like D&D and Pathfinder. So all of my opinions are like how I've been in those types of campaigns.
Right.
But it's also like there's so many other systems out there. I mean, many I don't even know exist, you know? Being a noob myself. But there's one that's really fun, Wander Home, which is a Kickstarter campaign to put out like an RPG book, and it's all just kind of exploration and socializing and creating a good experience with those you're playing with. Like, it has no dice, you can even play without any guide, and it's just like everyone goes in to build the world and experience as they want it. I think when they come up to a new destination, you get to roll on a table for different aspects the place could have.
There are dice.
Okay, well, like, yes. Okay, there are some dice, I suppose, but you don't use them to play. Everything is, like, token-based and not based on your actions.
Okay.
But yeah, no, it's really fun because you get to just, here are some aspects, how do we want to build this location that we're going to, and it's kind of all just, like, casual experience of exploration.
It's like a world-building exercise.
Yeah.
There are a lot of world-building games like that. You said it's a Kickstarter campaign. Is the campaign over?
Yes.
At this point? Okay.
I do believe it's over, and so like now you can buy the physical copy and the digital copy.
Okay. Awesome. That's pretty cool. There's other games that are similar to that. Like Gumshoe is a very common one that's brought up a lot in terms of like what Torrey explained as what he thought of as exploration, with the whole like investigating sort of thing. Like you go, the whole point of Gumshoe is you build the town together, and then you go around the town investigating crimes, or you know, finding lost cats. And so like you do interact with people along the way, but a lot of it is looking at the crime scene, finding clues, all that sort of jazz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like there are games that do more heavily focus on that sort of aspect of exploration than D&D and Pathfinder do.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a lot of games where they really try their best to force you away from combat by making it very deadly. Games where you start with very little HP and it never goes up, and and you die very easily. And
Looking at you, Burning Wheel.
I wasn't thinking of the Burning Wheel.
What are you thinking of?
I was thinking of the Sprawl.
Oh, okay.
Where it's powered by the apocalypse, and so you have essentially 6 hit points, and a gun will do 4 out of those 6.
Oh, damn.
And so
just like real life.
It's just like real life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you don't want to do combat,
No.
and socializing is an option, but a lot of that game is sort of like, or at least the way I played it is sort of heisty, investigating, and sneaking, and that kind of stuff. Trying your best to avoid being accidentally poisoned or shot by androids, etc.
Of course, yeah.
We've been talking about a whole bunch of other systems. Lea, you mentioned one before we started recording here. Blades in the Dark.
Yeah, Blades in the Dark is really, it doesn't strongly discourage combat, really, but it is a heist game, and sort of like if you were playing through Ocean's 11, and part of the point of a heist is to not be seen.
Right, of course, yeah.
And so a lot of it is sneaking, and you know, there's other options in the game. You can always be a gang that beats people up on purpose.
Right. One of those fun ones.
One of those fun ones.
Yeah.
Everyone's favorite gang.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads me to the question that that's been on my mind since we started this discussion is, can you do a whole session, 3-4 hours, of just exploration? Is that possible? Would that be fun?
It depends on how you want to describe exploration for the purposes of that session.
Right. So if it's the topic, or the way that you brought it up before, like, you know, we make a roll and then we go. Right? That seems kind of boring.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. You know, to me, if I make a skill check, I roll my survival, I find my food. Great. Let's move on to the next day. I roll my survival. Do I find my food? Nope. Oh, guess you get a level of exhaustion. Good for you. Now you move on to the next day. Do you find?
Yeah.
And so that seems non-interactive and not very role playing game. It's very game, not very role playing.
Right.
So
Losing out one of 3.
You
Like-
can always slowly describe how you're starving to death.
Oh.
right.
Ooh.
So
What
it
fun!
beautiful.
It kind of feels, if you're doing that, it kind of feels more like a board game.
It adds the
Right.
role playing back in if you have to describe her.
Yeah, but I think
Level
that
up from that trauma.
You almost caught a rat one time.
There,
Got
there,
away.
Can you
there-
imagine if the DM did that?
there are definitely board games that are like that, right? Like games like Terraforming Mars is a very similar sort of aspect. Like you're surviving on Mars.
Yeah.
And like it's a hostile environment. That's one of the aspects that we brought up as a like key point for exploration. So thinking about that, obviously that doesn't work, just making rolls, because it's a role-playing game and our goal is to role-play at least a little bit. So because we're not playing a board game, which you know if you want a board game, it's all about survival. I guarantee they're out there for you. So play those. But how would you do it then if not that way?
Yeah, and like I think kind of even like as a global point, like as we've kind of talked about these like kind of different pillars of like how RPGs are run, like making a full session out of like just combat
very doable.
Very doable.
It's in certain systems.
Yeah, and like making a whole, setup out of just like social encounters where it's like a political intrigue or like, investigation-based work, like that could easily be done.
Again,
but,
in certain systems,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
But like when it comes to exploration, it is very hard to make just exploration, as you said, it is normally a means to something rather than something in itself. But like I don't think it's entirely impossible. I just think it would be pretty difficult. Like you could go through and kind of like, as you were mentioning before, you could make like puzzle dungeons and things that are in about like exploring your environment and looking at what you're doing and looking what you're going through, or even like effectively making what I guess would be essentially like an escape room. Like you're not necessarily talking to people. You're not necessarily like going through and like getting fought every time you go into one. But like you could effectively try to recreate a similar one of those into like an RPG section where they have to go through and investigate clues and look for patterns and things and try to like find stuff in that to kind of make a lot more of the exploration of where they are in their kind of situation build into a lot more of what's kind of going on and play off of that a lot. Though like I think past kind of making something along like those lines, there isn't really a lot of options, at least that I can think of, for a like purely exploration based like session run. Yeah, okay. Like full setup.
I think that one thing that we might be taking for granted and like just saying without saying it is that when we say without social interaction, we mean without social interaction with NPCs. Yeah. Right? Obviously, the players are going to be interacting with other PCs, like each other, during whatever session it is, regardless of, I mean, hopefully they're interacting with each other, regardless of whether or not there's like a social aspect to it, which with like interacting with other NPCs or combat.
Yeah. Could you imagine just going to session and just not talking to a single other person in your session the entire time?
You just roll dice the whole time.
Roll dice by yourself in your room. This is a fun session.
Roll dice silently with other people in the room is. There are role playing games where you don't talk.
But I mean, you're still interacting with the other PCs. Yeah. When we say not interacting with people, we do mean NPCs is kind of the point I wanted to get across there.
Yeah. There's something really hard about considering running a campaign all about exploration, at least considering it from the perspective of like D&D and Pathfinder, is because you do the other forms, you do combat and you do socializing, and they can both get you somewhere and get you like progress and increase. They can get you somewhere, and exploration can really only get you from one location to the other. It's kind of harder to imagine how wandering through this forest am I going to get stronger.
It's not as versatile.
Yeah, how am I going to get things? So that's why most DMs are like, you're going through a forest, you come across a beast of the forest, now you have to fight it. And it's like, oh cool, that's a natural obstacle I've come across. Right. But that's combat again.
Yeah. The only way that I can think of doing exploration for a long period of time is, in my experience, in something like a one-shot, like 10 Candles.
Oh, yeah.
Where they're just straight up, there aren't NPCs. And combat is just you dying.
Unless you will them into existence.
You can will NPCs into existence. But there isn't... Like, that stuff doesn't exist. It is just straight, can you survive? Well, the goal of the game is to survive for as long as possible, but you're not supposed to survive. You're supposed to die. It's a horror game where all of it just leads to your slow demise.
So beautiful.
So horror games are a thing that we talked about in the combat thing, the combat sort of episode. Yeah, that's the word. Where
words are hard.
Words are hard. Where it doesn't really favor, or it favors a certain type of combat, and because it favors that certain type of combat, maybe it favors exploration more. Right? Maybe it favors that whole investigative sort of aspect of the game. If we bring investigation into the the fold of exploration, like we've talked about already, right? Like with maybe you're solving a mystery and that's sort of how you're doing your exploration. Maybe during that mystery you don't actually talk to suspects at all, you just gather evidence. Maybe you're just part of like a CSI team and you don't do the talking, right? Despite what the television show may show you. Like maybe you're just looking at the evidence and you have to like go research something or find go to different locations to find evidence, and you have to find the locations even. That could be exploration, and that could be a whole session. I think you're right, Sarah, that we can't do a full campaign
No way.
with just exploration.
I can't see that working.
I could totally see a full campaign with just social, like you talked about.
Yep.
Right? Maybe you're in a medieval court and you need to interact with a whole bunch of people.
Burning Wheel does that really well.
Burning Wheel does that really well with their Duel of Wits sort of system. There's also total combat games, right? With classic dungeon crawl, right? With the whole, like, I kick down the door and I fight some baddies. Very Munchkin-esque, right? And, of course, there's going to be roleplay within that, but it's not the main focus. And there's no social, right? Or not no, but, like, very little social, and the exploration is from one room to the next, rather than, like...
Maybe a roll in between.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So more of that, like, the exploration that you talked about at the beginning with it's a skill check and then we get to the next place. So I think it's possible to do it for a whole session.
I wouldn't put much past that.
But doing more than one whole session without any interaction with NPCs or monsters or, like, I guess those are the two things.
It's going to get dull fast.
Exactly. Especially because, like, the theater of the mind is really fun, but if I can't physically see and physically interact with the environment, I can see it getting old for me, at least personally, pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very fair. With just like an exploration just in your imagination, it's a little harder.
Yeah. I think the DMs, something that we haven't brought up yet in the podcast is physical, like tokens, physical, like
having minis, having the walls.
Yeah. Or even like physical, like props. Like if you're doing an investigation, I hand you a wanted poster. That could be that's something that sort of like draws you into it, and you could even fully investigate that wanted poster. Maybe the DM puts like little hints in it. They draw the person in a particular way so that you notice that person has a scar, and then when they're describing an NPC that you meet, they have a scar too, right? The exploration and interacting with the environment could be in real life as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've seen many DMs do that where they physically write letters to the players.
That's really cool. Yeah.
I've seen on YouTube, though obviously having never done this, but like I've even seen instances where like the players will like go through and they'll get to something and they'll like get to like the back of like a dungeon or something and they'll come across like a puzzle box and the DMs will like genuinely hand them a real puzzle
really
box
cool.
and it's like it's up to you people to figure out how to actually open this.
That'd be really fun.
And it's like, that's cool. I have neither the time nor the resources for that.
Yeah.
But one day, that sounds amazing.
I'm not about to make you people a puzzle box.
I feel like in most cases, as a player, at least, once you get into a situation you're so used to combat, when you reach a puzzle, you get the classic, like 4 PCs, 1 brain cell. The simplest puzzles are like right over your head. The DM's like, please, just the one little detail. Just notice this and you'll get it. And it's like, what detail?
Yeah.
Oh my god, what's this? What are these random things? Do they relate?
Which is always the most infuriating thing as the DM. It's like, because like it, it's like it seems sometimes it's like the most obvious thing, but because your players aren't looking for the obvious things and are looking for like the super hidden, it's just like, how are you not finding this? Like, it's right there.
That's something interesting actually that I've thought about a lot. When DMing is, what do you tell your players? Right? I think that's a big thing when talking about exploration that we haven't mentioned yet, is what do you tell them? If you're going through, it's really obvious, like if you're going through a forest, you tell them there are trees around. Maybe there's some wildlife on the ground. Maybe there's a path that they see. Like the really obvious, very, very obvious things in a forest, but what do you tell them? Maybe they're particularly skilled at some sort of like at like nature, for example, like Torrey brought up earlier. Maybe they're particularly skilled at noticing tracks. Maybe they're really used to looking like up at the sky. Maybe they see birds up there that are going in a certain direction, and they might know what that means, right? Yeah. So telling the players what their characters would know is kind of something that DMs have to think about, right? And that it's a little easier to think about in a forest setting, right?
Yeah.
Like all those examples I just gave are obviously, I think we would all be able to think of those. But when you're doing an investigation, right, and you have a group of investigators who are maybe your campaign is you're all a bunch of Sherlock Holmes types and you're solving mysteries, roaming around solving mysteries. That's still investigation, that's still exploration. Different all words.
Yeah, you're doing great.
That's still exploration, like we talked about, solving mysteries and interpreting clues and such. But what do you tell the players who are supposed to be master sleuths? Right? Do you give them the hint? Right? Or do you let them struggle with it because the players might not be master sleuths, but the characters are?
Right. You have to find that good balance of give them enough to keep them engaged and maybe get them looking.
Yeah.
But to still have something that they can actually look for to feel like they're doing the work.
Right. You don't want to be that phone game ad where it's like, what's the answer? Oh no, I can't figure it out. But it's sitting right, yeah. It's like, what number is on the screen? and the person types the wrong number. Your players aren't that dumb, but at the same time, you don't want to give them too much information, but you don't want to give them no information, right? Because you are literally their only source of information.
Yeah. And like if you go in exactly and you're doing that kind of like Sherlock Holmes style, like, you know, their player may be some master sleuth and is like, you know, like some like 19th level character is like ungodly strong, notices everything. But if they walk into the room and they're like, oh, well, like, you know, from that knife I can like clearly see like etc. I know who carries that because I've seen it before, and I can see that there are exactly these many footprints going in this direction with this covering, and I know who works in like the mine that would leave those it's this. And you just have to tell the player that because, quote-unquote, they know everything. Right. That's so boring. It's like it'd be a horrid experience as the player.
As the GM, you're essentially narrating your novel at that point,
exactly.
Right?
Like, yes, your character is, you know, some amazing investigator or whatnot, and, like, would your character potentially, like, pick up on all these things? Yeah, but not letting it have player agency really just messes up the player itself and kind of just takes away their ability to kind of have fun with the system and interact with everything if you just tell them everything because their character would know it. So, like, trying to at least give them something along the lines of, like, a little bit of a hint, or like, hey, like, you know, you feel like you've seen that, like, you know, type of dirt on the floor, or you think you recognize that knife from somewhere, to kind of at least guide them a little bit into like the right direction that their character would pick up on, but without just handing them the solution to the problem and making it boring for them. It really is about kind of just like finding that fine line and running it properly.
Yeah, totally. And well, when we're talking about that fine line, what do you think about different systems and how they handle that? Pathfinder and D&D sort of thing might handle that as like you make a roll, and like you make your nature roll or whatever to identify the dirt, and then you get to know where that dirt's from, or maybe you get to know you've seen that dirt before, depending on how successful the roll was,
or like what kind it is.
Maybe like, oh, that's dirt that comes from evergreen trees, and now you have to player has to remember where they saw evergreen trees last.
Yeah. Pray you've taken notes.
Yeah. That's another thing that we'll talk about, I think, is notes. Do you take notes as a player?
You should.
Do you?
Sometimes.
I forget.
Often I leave it to everyone else.
Until the end of the session. I'm like, oh no, I have to write everything down.
I sometimes do, but it also depends on like the character I'm playing. Like if I'm playing some like barbarian that just runs around and smacks things, like, no, because I don't, like, they wouldn't have, like, if I'm not playing someone who I feel would have great memory for that kind of thing anyway, I don't bother.
Right.
I, to a degree, rely on my party, as my character would, to kind of rely on their teammates to kind of be able to help them in an area that they're not strong in necessarily, and kind of, like, working with the party in that sense.
I have played games where no one takes notes except one person who is designated to be the scribe, and then sometimes they're not there, and
Yup.
you don't know anything.
Everything falls apart.
Dun dun dun.
And that's you have to remember the name of a very important noble and no one remembers because your scribe is missing.
That's actually a really interesting thing that like old D&D used to do. There used to be like character roles, right? The guardian, the leader, the whatever, like, you know, that would be taken up by certain classes within the game. Those are like the more in-game, in the fiction roles.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there are other roles that were even defined in earlier books of people who are like, I'm the note taker. I take care of the inventory for the party. I take care of...
Interesting.
And that hasn't really transitioned into my play very much.
Yeah.
You know, if you're gonna take notes, you take notes individually, and at least in the games that I've played in, I tend to take some notes, at least for the important stuff, like people's names and things that I might want to remember.
Yeah.
Or like locations and stuff. But
Yeah, I think it also really depends, because I've been playing most recently in a lot of combat-centric campaigns, like a D&D, Pathfinder, and I don't really take notes for that, because anything I don't remember off the top of my head, I trust that my DM will, like, help me out, because they're not, like, as important as, like, in a social campaign. Because when I was playing the Burning Wheel, I took a lot of notes. I had an organized spreadsheet for, like, important dates and what I did.
I remember
Facts.
that.
Yeah. Sometimes it's necessary to stay organized that way, and to kind of keep things on track when it's so important for your character to socialize and to keep those details.
so in an exploration game, would you do that?
If I'm playing an exploration in terms of investigation, then yes.
Okay.
I think I would have to, because at that point, like, there's so many details, and you never know what triggers the next clue and what you'll need to remember. But if we're talking about, like, exploring in the wilderness, as though, like, you're looking for something maybe there, I don't think I would as much, just because I feel like what triggers needing notes is having more of that social aspect, because you need to keep up with your relationships with others and keeping with what you've said to them and what they've said to you. But when it's just a whole bunch of PCs, like, in the woods looking for a shrine or whatever, you don't really need the notes as much, because I'm like, oh, I passed that large boulder 3 days ago. Gotta remember.
Yeah, and like, I think it's also interesting, like, as your kind of point of, like, trusting the DM to kind of give you that info and whatnot. I find with me DMing, it depends on what the info is. Like, there's definitely some stuff where it's like, oh, you know, like, general information that your character would, like, blatantly know, like, what's the name of the month? I don't remember how you've set up, like, the calendar system if you use your own system. Your character would obviously know that, and I'm not going to be like, well, you should have known things, but, like, if you're having a conversation with someone, and they're like, oh, you know, like, that person whose name I don't remember from that town I don't remember, it's like, I've had players go into that and just look at me, and it's like, I'm not here to tell you that. Like, if you don't remember, then, like, you don't remember. Like, that's up to you to make sure that, like, if people, places, like, major things that are, like, very important to what you're doing, you gotta make sure you remember that. Like, I'm not here just to re-give you everything. If it's something you want to know, note it.
Like, personally, like, I don't have, like, a perfect memory, and we don't play
Totally.
And the point is, and the other thing is, like, you don't play every day,
exactly,
right? But the characters are living their lives every day, so they might have a better memory than you of the things 100%. That are occurring. So you take notes to supplement that. I think, for people who might be worrying about the metagaming sort of aspect of that, that's kind of how I justify it to myself. Is like my character would remember this because they did it yesterday. Yeah, like they did it 5 minutes ago, but I did it last week, so. I've had a whole 7 days worth of things happen in between those days.
Real life exploration.
Real life exploration, exactly.
Finding stuff in your notebook. I've seen people online who take notes in character.
Oh.
That's super
So
cool.
they write everything down from the point of view of their character writing a journal.
Dang bards.
Oh, that's really cool.
That sounds like a very bard thing.
They only write things down that are important to their character, and only things that their character was seen or witnessed.
And that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that helps some people, because some people are really worried about the whole metagaming idea, right? And I can understand that. So that's kind of how I justify it, and that's a great way to justify it in your head as well.
Yeah, tying in note-taking to more of the exploration side, you can also, like, promote players to take notes and update a physical map because like when you're exploring, you might be given a map that maybe doesn't have all the details, or maybe has like not true details written down, or like just not like an accurate representation of what the world actually looks like. So as they go through it, you know, it's their job to be like, does this actually match the record that I have?
I've done exactly that, actually. You know, like the players uncovered like an old map of a region, and a lot of the cities had physically moved or were gone. And so they went to a place, or they were on their way to a place, and they stopped at a town or something, and they were like, hey, we're going to this place. And the people in the town were like, it's over there though. and so that's kind of a little bit of a rude awakening for some players who might view maps that the DM gives them as sort of like sacrosanct, like these are the maps, this is the way the world looks.
Right.
Which for some DMs that's what they do, and that's cool, fine. Good for them. But the way that I DM is, if you receive a thing in game, like if you receive a map in game from a map maker or from a person, or you stole one or whatever, that map is the map that person has, right? Like it
maybe what they think is true.
It's what they think is true. Or, you know, maybe they get directions from an NPC. That NPC actually doesn't know where the thing is. And they may have motives for telling you whether or not something is. But, so knowledge is imperfect, and you have to update it.
Yeah, and I think it's also very interesting that I like kind of on the map front that you were mentioning as well, is even in the campaign that one of the ones that I run currently is we have one player who, since we've started, as I've described everything like around them and like where they've gone, he has been, I think, like in paint trying to draw what he thinks the map is of the world, and like he's been trying to basically be his own cartographer. Yeah. Like there are individual maps that they can get of like smaller regions, but there is no like global map available because no one's mapped the whole world in our setup.
Right.
So like he's just been spending the time, like every time I'm describing, you know, where water inlets are, where rivers are, where mountains are, he's been actively like building the map of what he sees, and like it's not bad.
That's impressive, actually.
It's the best compliment.
It's not amazing, but it's not bad.
Right, because I mean, one, he's not a cartographer, I assume.
No.
And two, the information that you're giving them is probably also imperfect.
Well, and as well, it's like, oh, well, like, there's a stream that goes fairly far inland. How far is fairly far?
Exactly, exactly.
It's not... I'm not saying, you know, this stream goes exactly 496 meters inland with a 12-degree angle to the hook left just around this one mountain. Like, no, like, you're getting the rough info that you would get from observing it, not necessarily, like, dead accurate measurements.
Yep. Same thing. I think that's really important in dungeons, that players keep an accurate map of where they're going.
Yeah.
Because once I didn't do that and I got lost. I got very lost. Good thing the other players were keeping track of where they were.
Same thing. Sometimes you designate one person to make a map of the area you're in.
Yeah, don't do a good job.
They either don't do a good job or they're absent the next session and don't have a map.
Exactly. But one thing, when I was GMing, one of my players actually, they specifically in game bought ink and paper in order to make the map in game, like in character, which I thought was super cool. And then they physically made it also, because we were playing physically. This was pre-COVID.
What a time.
What a time.
Exactly. And we had like minis and stuff on a board, but whenever they left a line of sight of a place, I would take off the board because they can't see it anymore. And so like it's not if it's not visible to them, they shouldn't see it on the table either. Yeah. Or like if a door closed or whatever. And so she was drawing the map as she remembered it, which was cool because it helped them find their way back to where they came from.
Yeah.
You also have like the classic telltale of like one of your players, like the moment they go in, just tying a string to something and like, tying a bit of their rope, and then once they're lost, they're like, "Cool, I'm just gonna follow the string back."
The Hansel and Gretel's classic. Yeah.
And there's the DM. You get the little fun of
cutting it.
Yeah, or doing like have you seen the movie Labyrinth?
Yeah.
When she was drawing arrows with her lipstick or whatever, and the little like gremlins or whatever they were came and they just like turned the stones that the drawing was on, so the arrows pointed in completely different directions.
Yeah.
If you do that as a DM, that's
mean.
a little mean, but it definitely spices things up.
Yeah,
It can be very entertaining from a DM's perspective.
If you leave breadcrumbs, someone's gonna eat the breadcrumbs.
There's mice in the dungeon, yo.
Yummy, yummy.
Awesome. So I think that we've.
Sorry. Actually, before we wrap things up, I have a topic for potential debate.
Okay. I
so
like debates.
We've talked a lot about how hard it would be to have a purely exploration session and campaign, and so I've started brainstorming an idea, and I want to bring that up to you guys.
Okay.
Okay. Picture this: you have the players; they're dropped into a situation. It's apocalypse style. Everything is gone. There's no other creatures. They're the only ones. Something has happened, and they have no memory.
Okay.
You're describing apocalypse world. Continue.
Yes. So assuming that they don't remember anything about themselves, and that's both the characters and the players playing them.
Okay.
The exploration is then discovering who they are, where they are, and like discovering more about how they can interact with the world. That feels purely exploration.
It feels very narrative.
Yeah. And so my problem with that initial problem is if there's nothing else, what am I doing?
Like,
assuming it's like nothing else living. So like there's still objects and like things to interact with.
Like I can look at a cactus or something. Like but like what am I doing?
I mean, it would be like something like, hey, you wake up one day with no memory and there's no living people, but you're in your home.
Right.
Assumedly, and
Right.
like
Or
all
like-
your
or
stuff
yeah.
is there.
Okay.
So it would be very mystery based.
Okay, so it's a longer mystery. Essentially,
kind of like unravel what happened and
Okay.
unravel what caused this to occur, kind of, and who you are.
I
can
don't
see
know. I don't know for how long you can
Yeah, that's
drag that out for.
I think it could definitely work for a bit.
Yeah, definitely longer than the
A session.
classic mystery, right?
Yeah.
Which might last 1 or 2 or 3 sessions. Definitely longer than like your classic heist in Blades in the Dark, right? Which
I also
might last 1 or 2 sessions.
I also don't know if it would work for all groups of people. I
Right.
feel like there'd definitely be certain, like, you'd have to find people where, like, that's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, just certain groups might not find enjoyment on that. But no, I think that's fair. I think, like, with the right group of people, with the right setting, kind of making a what happened, what caused it, and who are you in it kind of long scale, kind of a, I guess, mystery kind of exploration piece could work.
Yeah, I think if anyone's actually interested in entertaining this kind of idea, it would be really interesting to have like the kind of, you wake up, you don't remember anything, you start finding more details about yourself, maybe the DM provides flashbacks or like you get a sense of like deja vu and like they kind of hand you memories.
Right.
Only for like at the end for it to have been like all a simulation. Like you had to break out of the simulation and then you have combat.
That's so overdone.
I know, but in an RPG.
It's so cliche.
No, so I mean cliches are cliches for a reason, but also like the for me personally, I would really dislike that as a player because it would feel like all of the stuff that I've done
Was
over the
pointless.
last however many sessions literally doesn't matter.
What I would do...
It devalidates all the work.
What I would do is, instead of it being a simulation, you go through this process of figuring out who you are and why everyone is gone or dead or whatever, and at the end, it turns out it was all your fault.
Oh,
That's
damn,
good too.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Another one might be like, it turns out they're not gone, but you end up finding them in the end.
Yeah.
Like maybe there was like a nuclear apocalypse or something.
And some group got underground.
Yeah, and somebody got underground or something, and so you find out there isn't no one around.
I also like the idea, if you are players that also like really trust your GM well, would be kind of the interesting thing of usually to a degree you kind of make your character and the rest of the party and like the DM kind of learns about who you are as you go. But it's also going to be very interesting if the DM knows exactly who you are and everything about you, but you as a player are slowly learning who you actually are, and like you're learning about what you're like and how you are.
We've talked about running this sort of
From
game
that.
with like
This
all
would be the
players
most
are like
interesting.
amnesiacs, and the DM has all your character sheets.
You would very much though need like trust that your DM knows like what they're making and isn't making garbage for you.
Yeah.
And as well that they would be making something that they know you as a player would actually enjoy playing.
Yeah.
Like if you're someone who only enjoys playing like mages and casters and you just get handed a fighter, like you're not gonna have fun. Like
100%.
You'd need a DM that you trust and has enough knowledge of you and your group to kind of pull that off, but I think it could be very interesting.
Yeah.
So to kind of end us off here with that whole debate thing, because I think we figured out that that's a pretty cool idea.
I would enjoy it.
That we would enjoy either running or playing. Even though I had initial reservations, I think a lot of us did. But the more we talk about it and the more you flesh out the idea, I think it's really cool.
We definitely need a lot of work just so you could have those puzzles and those aspects to explore.
My main question is, what system would you run it in? Because I don't think games like D&D and Pathfinder, like you said, that we're more familiar with, would run that super well.
No.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think maybe the Fate system would be interesting for that because it's a lot more on like aspects of things and like those kinds of like details.
Very narrative, right?
Very narrative based.
Yeah.
I think it'd be possible to run it in a Pathfinder D&D, but you'd have to homebrew the whole situation and kind of have, I guess, rules for making the system justified and that being like tied in with the character. It'd be a lot harder, I suppose,
because you'd have to hack the system, whereas there are other systems that already work for that, like Fate, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's a cool thing, is Fate would work. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, for sort of working with me to talk through exploration.
Yeah, hopefully we gave you some food for thought.
Yeah. As a concept, and definitely gave me some food for thought as well. Next episode, we will be running a session that bases around exploration. There will probably be other aspects to the session, just like in the combat one, there were other aspects to the session other than combat, but we'll try and showcase exploration as an idea.
The highlight, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for tuning in to Newb Perspectives, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
See ya.
Bye.